Harath? Does it look all right?
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent, thanks. Okay, so I'm going to make a presentation about Economic and Social Research Council. I'm not from the council, so I'm not going to speak that much about the technicalities of the grants. I'm quite happy to do so if we have some questions on them. But I'm going to give an overview and then kind of some thoughts from my own experiences. So the experience, obviously, getting some grants from ESRC, so from that side of things, but also in terms of quite a lot of involvement across a number of the groups that look at the different sorts of research funding that are offered. So kind of the thoughts I've got and the lessons I'll suggest are kind of very much from the panel experience as a member or chair across a number of them over the years. So ESRC first might be relatively unfamiliar to many of you. We didn't and don't still get many health economists putting in applications either as a PI or as a co-I, which is a massive shame. So really keen to encourage people to do that. I'm very happy to talk to people offline individually. I have done a couple of times over the years in terms of any advice I can give about people putting in, because it's a fantastic scheme and it'd be great to get more health economics in there. So just a little bit about it. Obviously, it's one of the UKRI research councils. Just keep bearing in mind the title is Economic and Social. Okay, we'll come back to that. In terms of budget, it's not as big as MRC, but it's reasonable size, and it's split across kind of responsive research, strategic, and skills and training. I'm going to talk mostly about the responsive research. So these are the ideas that you have, that you put in as PI. There is no kind of deadline system for those. The panels that I'll talk about meet 3 times a year. And typically, if you want to get to a panel, you probably need to put in about 3 months before the panel meets. And those dates are on the website, so you can get a rough idea of when you need to put it in by. First thing to check, and to just give you a sense of where they're coming from, the strategic priorities at the moment that have been around for quite a while. I've put check in brackets because they may well be renewed around about now in the forthcoming period. But you get a sense there of what the focus has been of the council, particularly over the last few years and going forwards. The 2 in italics at the bottom are obviously much more recent, so COVID, but that was dealt with under a separate sort of funding system. So what I'm talking about isn't related to COVID specific research. And a new one that has been proposed, maybe in now, is around the digital age and the progression of that. And obviously there's a lot of resonance around digital through the health service and in public health at the moment. So that might be a really good one for us to think about as health economists putting in proposals. So the funding opportunities range from pretty small monies around things like seminars through to large centres, which are up to £5 million, which is the last thing I was involved in just a few weeks ago. We finished off the current round of centres competition. I've highlighted ones in red, which are probably the ones that most people are going to look at putting in for, that are on this call, and the ones I'll talk a little bit more about. But I'm very happy to talk about large grants or centres or anything else if you want to at any point. But particularly those standard grants, and the SDIA is Secondary Data Analysis Initiative. And those 2 are under a system which is presented here, which is essentially these 4 grant assessment panels, or GAP panels. And you'll see that they cover a number of areas. So you haven't got a panel per sort of discipline. So if you found economics, it's under GAP C. And again, it reflects a little bit the talk we just had in terms of, a panel will encompass a wide range of people. So you are going to have to speak to people who've got expertise in politics and international relations and social policy, etc. on the panel. So the proposals will be reviewed, particularly through the peer review college. And they'll be reviewed essentially by what I would call kind of mainstream economists, not necessarily health economists. And once you get through that system, then it goes to panel, and the panel's really critical. And there you've got to kind of have this slightly wider appeal, and people have got to be able to sort of understand it and see real value in it, even though it's not their specific expertise. So it's really important to bear that in mind. Criteria, as with anything, it wants to be world-class, really solid scientific quality. And I put acceptable risk in brackets because they quite like things that are a bit edgy, but they want to know it's a potentially achievable sense of edginess rather than just a ludicrous idea that's not going to work, basically. Other key things, though, are that they are interested in theoretical, methodological, as well as applied research. So particularly if you want to push theoretical developments or methodological developments, that's a very suitable thing to put in for ESRC. And although they will fund single discipline work, particularly if it's very focused theoretical single discipline work, they're very, very keen on interdisciplinary. Now, typically, applicants interpret that as interdisciplinary across different social sciences, but it is appreciated when there's disciplinary work that's beyond the social sciences. And where that is quite a reasonable element of the proposal, they will look for reviewers from other councils, for example. So they will frequently go across to MRC, for instance, for us, to look for reviewers specifically related around the health topic, for example, that comes in. And they're looking for research with high potential impact. The key here is again, sometimes people think impact means it has to be kind of at the end user, has to be at a patient or at a community or public level, but it can be impact on the scientific community. So again, if you think about theoretical or methodological developments, those are going to impact much more on the community of academics and researchers, and that's absolutely fine. So it's about the appropriateness. So if you're doing theoretical work, it might be appropriate for it to be fairly single discipline, and it might be appropriate that the only impacts are through academic vehicles, and that's absolutely fine and appropriate. I flip up the scoring system because at the panel they end up being scored out of 10, and anything over 7 is fundable. Very little gets 10, as you can imagine, but funding very seldom goes beyond 8.5 in reality. So it's actually not good enough to just have an excellent proposal. You really need an outstanding one. So it's a very narrow range. Success rate is about something like 12–13%, I think, in recent times for the standard panels. For the secondary data analysis, it's slightly higher. It's probably about 20%, but you're looking at a fairly low success rate of these things going in. So it's really important to make sure that it's absolutely solid before it goes in. Now, in some ways, not having a deadline is really good for that because you haven't got pressure, you've got the time to create it to be the best it can be. On the other hand, sometimes not having a deadline is a bad thing because you kind of leave it to go on and go on and go on, and 4 years later, you've not actually submitted it. But it is really important to get this well reviewed, internally or by externals before you put it in to give it that. It's got to have that kind of real solid edge to it. So some lessons to be thinking about when putting in for it. Firstly is be clear why it's ESRC. Back to this, remember what it says, it is economic and social science. So a health problem or health context actually, in my experience, is actually quite good. The panel often can resonate with a health issue compared to some other areas that come along. It can often be seen to have a very direct relevance and importance. And actually, this is anecdotal, not evidence-based, but health proposals, I think, tend to do pretty well and better than average when they come through. We just don't get many of them coming through. It's really good when you're putting it in to think of the issue that's not the health issue, and then start the framing from there. So I just put up a couple of titles for my own grants to illustrate. So the first one there is essentially about health workers and the crisis of health workers. But that's not written in the title, and it comes in a bit later as this is the case study. The focus of it is around social preferences and the labour supply function. So the work is essentially the same, but the framing is very focused on, in this instance, productivity, which is one of the strategic highlights. The other one there, I mean, this is essentially about, well, it's resonance for COVID, but anyway, about pandemic influenza a number of years ago. But the focus was in about the finance sector and the impacts, and that was about macroeconomy, which was one of the strategic objectives again. So we do sometimes get proposals in that are using social science methods, and that just isn't enough. You can use the methods, it's fine, but what's the importance to the economic and social sciences? And as I said, reviewers are going to be some mainstreamers, so you've got to be able to have that sort of appeal as well as just to your health audience you might be more used to. It's really good to demonstrate a track record. This is probably true across most funders, but particularly ESRC. And it's great to start small and start early. So don't think, you know, I have to go in for one of these larger grants to begin with. And things like the secondary data analysis was very specifically designed around trying to support junior researchers and mid-career researchers going for their first ESRC grant. So they're smaller, they're up to about 250, 300,000, I think. And the only requirement there really is you use a data set that ESRC has funded, and beyond that you kind of go for it. It's really good if you're putting in your first one to have someone else with an ESRC record on it. That will kind of help a bit, particularly if it's a bit risky. And as I said, they have a slightly higher success rate, so I'm always really keen on supporting people going for those. I think they're a really good one to get on your CV. They tend to turn over quickly because they're secondary data, and you've got something going there to get into. And just another reminder that we're obviously part of the Future Leaders Fellowship Scheme, which I'm not talking about, but we could come on to if you wanted to. And lesson 3 is all the effort will go into the core of the case for support, which is got to be innovative, and it's got to be really robust, and all those sorts of usual things. And then it's a real shame when sometimes proposals fall down on some of the other aspects of the proposal. So the lay summary is really key, because sometimes that's pretty much what the panel will read who are not going to be involved in specifically discussing it. So they need to get a sense from that it's really exciting and important. And then they're favourably disposed to it when we start having a discussion. It was great to hear Rosin talk about budgets being appropriate. So it's not about making it cheap, it's about making it appropriate. So don't underdo yourself in terms of the budget. Sometimes people look like they've done that to squeeze under the thresholds, and that doesn't go down well. Think through your impact, obviously, and your team, and particularly if you're new to being a PI, thinking about the project management and being seen to have thought that through. And in a number of proposals, it's really quite good to have some capacity development in, which if you're a new researcher into this is almost part and parcel of doing it. And just wanted the final stage. So I put up the scoring scheme, and let's say you get your 8.5. So you're doing quite well in terms of the scoring. At the end, proposals are ranked. So there could be a number that are on 8.5, and then there'll be essentially 8.5 high, 8.5 medium, 8.5 low, and they'll end up in a rank. And these sorts of things I've just mentioned can often make the difference between being a high or a low, and so you're through or you're not. So when you get to that sort of scoring level, they've pretty much all got the top point there. They're all good science. Then it's a question of saying, well, do we prefer that over that one? Would that be a higher rank or what? It's a marginal decision. And these sorts of things in these other bullet points are the sorts of marginal areas where people go, oh, that wasn't so good on capacity development as the other one. Okay, we'll put that one up further. So it's always worth, you know, really again thinking through those through as well as the core science. So why would I plug ESRC? Because it's got a low success rate and it looks really difficult. Why on earth would you do that when you can go for something else? I think it's a really useful way to develop your own niche. Often in our day jobs, we're involved in multidisciplinary work. It's typically led by someone from a more health-related perspective, which is absolutely fine. So it can sometimes be a bit harder to kind of break through that and develop your own sort of part of it. And there's a number of ways you can get those PI grants. Of course, we've heard a couple. I had a methodology grant years ago. It was fantastic, for example, from MRC. But the ESRC one's clearly going to be more led by the economists than, say, the epidemiologists. So it is a really good way of kind of pushing that on. I found it really useful to kind of keep the economics going and maintain that USP in the collaborative research. Your USP is you're coming as the economist to this multidisciplinary research. So it helps you very much maintain that and, in a sense, evidence-based that. With anything though, just remember your audience. keep the focus, track record, and those last things I talked about, I always call sprinkling the glitter, but making sure that around the solid core, you've got lots of really attractive good stuff as well. And well, as with the last speaker, office staff are really helpful, very supportive, and they want proposals going in that stand a good chance, because otherwise it's wasted their time as well as yours if it's not going to. So they'll help as much as they can. So please do contact them. As I said, if you're really thinking of putting something in and you want a quick chat, I'm very happy to do that as well. I think that's, yeah, is me done, Hareth.
Thanks, Rich. That's fantastic. Really, really useful to get the experience of